I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. This conversation delves into the complexities of intimate partner violence, focusing on the critical need for safety plans, the impact of immigration status on abusive relationships, and the role of social workers in providing comprehensive support. Anasha Anglade shares her personal experiences with domestic violence and how they shaped her desire to help both survivors and perpetrators. This conversation explores the challenges faced by victims, the inadequacies of current support systems, and the potential for integrating behavior analysis and acceptance and commitment therapy in treatment. Anasha emphasizes the need for individualized treatment plans and the importance of addressing the cycle of abuse, particularly in relation to children. This episode highlights the ongoing need for effective interventions and support for those affected by domestic violence. The discussion highlights, today on the podcast, we have Anasha Anglade. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are. Hello.
Welcome, Anasha. Cool. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of an origin story of kind of how you got into the field of ABA, but also how you came to start focusing on domestic violence in your practice.
So the domestic violence interest came way before I even knew what ABA even was.
Okay.
And I feel like I've spoken to a lot of people about this. Like, well, how did you find out about ABA? And it's pretty common that like no one really knew about ABA or that ABA even existed before deciding to just jump into the field.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it happened when I had my master's degree. I was like in a job that I had been working in for like 10 years at a pharmaceutical company. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to be stuck here. I want to like do something with my life. I want to be something. I want to put my degree to use because it wasn't being used or even acknowledged at the company that I was at before. So it's like, well, what's the point of going to school for all these years and getting these degrees if it's not going to matter in the current environment that you're in? So I started doing like some Googling and I stumbled upon Indeed, and there was just like a flurry of different positions for BCBA and BCBA and BCBA. I'm like, what is this BCBA thing? So that's what kind of like got me started with the whole digging. Like, what is BCBA and what is ABA and how could this be used? Like, what is this stuff that I keep on seeing on Indeed? And it pays really, really well. I've never seen numbers like this before in my life. So that is what kind of hooked me. And then I started really doing a lot of research into what ABA actually was. And I had taken like one course in my undergrad. It was like, oh, so it's kind of like this whole Pavlovian conditioning with the dog experiment thing. So I was like, oh, yeah, I think I could do this. So then I just, like I usually do, I just sat head first and I applied to a few different positions and interviewed, and I landed a job at the first ABA agency that I was at for like a year and a half. And I went in knowing like, okay, I want to do this. My goal is to become a BCBA, and my end goal is to fuse this ABA thing with domestic violence because I can see that there's parallel. Like this could be used for behavior in general, right? So this is what I want to do. So that's kind of where everything started. And the reason why domestic violence was something that I really wanted to hone in on is because I have like a history with domestic violence. I have a daughter. She's 5 now. She's awesome. She's like 5 going on 25. And when I was with her father, we were in a very toxic relationship. And it was very abusive, physically, financially, psychologically, emotionally, all of the different domains that you can abuse. That's what it was. And I always felt like there was hope for him. like, hey, you can change if you really want to change. It's not like some irreversible condition. This can be remedied. This can be fixed. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of victims kind of fall into. Like, okay, well, I'm going to stay because I see your potential. I
Right.
know the person that you can be. You can be such an awesome person. There's just these moments where you're not that great. And I get affected by it. The family gets affected by it. Children get affected by it, but I know that there is good here. So I'm going to stick it out and, just hope that I can help you realize how awesome you are. And I kind of fell into that revolving door, that trap.
Mm.
I mean, I still feel like there's still hope for perpetrators of domestic violence. And that's why I really wanted to make this like my life's work. This is like
Mm.
my little baby. I do work with children. I work with survivors as well. And I have had the pleasure of working with some perpetrators as well. But real focus, the real reason why I really wanted to start this kind of work is because I really wanted to help provide perpetrators with the tools that they need to like just communicate a little bit more functionally instead of
Mm.
resorting to those maladaptive behaviors, those problem behaviors that lead to the violence that people see in the home and people getting hurt and sometimes killed because of like a momentary emotion and feeling.
Mm. Wow. Lots to unpack there. You said before we kind of do that, you said you already had a master's degree when you were working in the pharmaceutical company. What were your master's degree in?
General psychology.
Oh, I want to get into the domestic violence piece very shortly here, but I'm curious, how did you end up getting a master's in psychology and then working at a pharmaceutical company?
Because the money was good. Because unfortunately, in an entry level position with a degree in psychology, you don't really get offered very much per
Mm.
hour, per year, but you have to deal with a lot. There's a lot that's on your plate. You have to worry
Yep.
about session notes. You have to worry about like your ethics. You have to worry about sometimes even scheduling your own sessions, dealing with the weight of the conversations and the work that you have to deal with. If you are doing social work, sometimes it gets dangerous. Like there's a lot that you have to do work wise, but the compensation is not very pleasing. It's not very reinforcing. So I went where, the reinforcement was.
Something that you said early on there about when you're with your partner and you're feeling like they saw his potential, you wanted to help. So you say that this is a common sort of symptom, for lack of a better term, being a victim of domestic violence is to kind of go into that mode. Oh, the reason I ask is because it also seems like I get it. I get what you're saying about sort of how, this that cycle can happen because you keep thinking, oh, I can do this. I can fix it now. I can fix it now. I see the potential and how that can be really damaging. But then I also see this being sort of strength in the sense of, if that was, I'm not saying this right, but if that was your personality, that was sort of your intuition to kind of do that. That fits well with kind of the work you're doing now too. That you see the potential in folks and whatnot. And so it's I don't really know if there's a question here, but I guess I think I'm just noticing that there's that these victims have a it's a strength that they want to help their partner,
Yeah.
but
And they probably don't even realize it.
right, but at the same time it's also the excuse they probably give their partner so that they keep kind of getting into that cycle. Is that kind of what happens?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would say an excuse, only because I'm just putting myself back into that mindset
Yeah,
where I was like, okay, well, I don't understand why you're doing what it is that you're doing because, like,
yeah,
you're so smart, you're so well spoken,
yeah,
personable. Like, why can't you just do X, Y, and Z that you need to
yeah.
do in this situation in order to have like an adult conversation? So in that time, in those moments, like I knew like, okay, this is you have these capabilities.
Do you have a certification with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, or the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or would like a certificate of attendance for another organization. You can earn 1.5 continuing education credits by going to www.behaviorspeak.com, click on CEUs, and enter the 3 secret words. The first secret word is violent. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, you're not excusing their behavior. You're just like, if you could do this a different way, you have the ability, is sort of what
Right.
your mindset is. And so, why aren't you? Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it's not necessarily like, okay, well, let me excuse your behavior because of this potential. Like, even though we might not be able to say it out loud in those moments because we hadn't found our voice just yet, we know, like, okay, this is not okay. You shouldn't be hitting people. You shouldn't be strangling me. You shouldn't be placing these threats on me. You shouldn't be stealing my credit cards and then, like, basically just like puffing up your chest and asking me, like, okay, what are you going to do about it? And, just kind of flaunting your power and control over me. Like, I know you should not be doing this, but I want to keep the peace, or you're paying the bills, or my children. I don't want my children to know about everything that's going on, or I don't want you to hurt my children. So, because in order to protect all these other aspects of my life or our lives, I'm going to just keep quiet and just not saying anything, because why add fuel to the fire when you could just like kind of keep things at bay and leave things as they are.
So was your young one not exposed to it, or?
So funny thing about trauma is that it happens in vitro. It happens, it's not but in the utero, in the womb. So yes, she was exposed because there was abuse that happened during my pregnancy as well as after I delivered. So I didn't stay past the 1 month mark. Like, once she hit a month and it was still continuing, that's when I decided, like, she's here now. And it's continuing. I don't want her to continue to observe this and normalize this sort of behavior. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave now. Like, she was my catalyst to making that decision to leave. But it had happened. She was exposed in utero, and when she was an infant. And honestly, I was talking to my sister about this the other day. Actually, the abuse doesn't stop when you leave, especially if you have kids. Well, whether you have kids or not, actually, because some abusers, they start stalking their exes and following them to work, tracking their phone calls.
Wow.
And a lot of victims end up being seriously hurt or killed after they leave. So that's actually one of the most dangerous times, is when you're planning to leave and after you leave. It's pretty dangerous. But for people who share a child in that dynamic, the abuse also doesn't stop, because now you have leverage. You have some connecting fiber that you can manage. So, there was police being called. There was arguments. I remember I moved back to my parents' house because I didn't want to stay at my place anymore. So I rented it out because too many memories, and he knew where I stayed. He had access. So I was like, yeah, I need to be away from this location. And he would come to my parents' house. He would cause arguments with myself, my family, call us names. We had to call the police over a few times during exchange because, the legal system, it has not really caught up yet as far as like how dangerous a domestic or intimate partner violence situation could be. So they granted him his visitation rights, the visitation that he requested. So I wanted to provide visitations, couldn't get it, but that's fine.
Wow.
Because he wasn't a monster is what the judge said. So during those drop-offs, I had to make sure that I called a police escort so that I made sure that I was protected and my daughter was protected. And that wasn't it didn't always go over too well with him. And again, she was there. So she was exposed to all of that up to about maybe 2 years ago. Everything started like kind of tapering off. So she's experienced a little bit in her very.
Yeah, no, that's wow. Yeah, really good points about sort of it doesn't just end the moment you leave, and obviously you made the right choice to leave to protect her, sort of physically. And, probably had she have been harmed, God forbid, well, had you stayed, maybe the judge would have a different thought on the custody as well. But it was only because you kind of prevented it from happening in the first place that the judge let him off in a way, right? And that's a pretty unfair
Legal
part of
system seems right now they're very reactive. Unfortunately, they take reactive measures to, the cases that come their way, and not very proactive just yet, unfortunately. And that's very punishing for a victim that is, or a survivor that's looking for help from the legal system or the legal authorities. We usually just say, just forget this. I'm not going to go through this again, or I'm not going to re-victimize myself. Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you've been able to take this life-changing, horrible experiences and turn them into a career, to try to kind of help some other folks. You're never going to be out of work. There's a lot of different folks that you can kind of support. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say in some ways, I guess, because, domestic violence is going to continue to happen, but also just that it's not just one, it's not just the victim. It's not just the perpetrator. There's the victim, there's the perpetrator, there's the children, there's probably, other folks that can be connected as well. Yeah, exactly. So I definitely want to dive deep into sort of how you and others could potentially use ABA and other ways to sort of, work with these folks. But what's sort of the normal process? So what's the current sort of treatment, I guess, for lack of a better term, for victims of domestic violence, and then, well, let's start with that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So when I conceptualize it, for me, it doesn't look any different from like an intake for an individual that has autism, right? You do your assessment so you can identify where the gaps are, where the behavioral excesses are, etc. Find out from the client what they want to work on, what they want to improve on, and figure out like, okay, well, let's come together. Let's put our brains together based on the results of this assessment and based on what you're telling me, based on what I'm observing. These are the things that we're agreeing to work on, throw it in a treatment plan and a behavior intervention plan if needed, and then, get to work. You meet regularly and implement your interventions, have them implement the interventions while you're not there, collect some data. It's going to be self-report data, but it's okay, because that's kind of where it has to be, especially if you're working with an adult and, their parents or their like teachers or professionals, and they have lives and they can't, work directly on some things for 2 to 3 hours straight, but you still want them to work on stuff. You're going to say, okay, well, I want you to take this home and I want you to work on this skill, and I want you to collect some data on that and report to me either like throughout the week or when we meet up again. And then we'll continue to go from there, and we'll just kind of reevaluate as we go on to see if the interventions are working. If they are, great. If not, then let's make some adjustments and, kind of go from there. And that's kind of where that overlap with like mental health therapy comes into play, because it looks like a mental health therapy session. Like you're meeting for like almost an hour and you're hearing them talk about their updates and things that have become barriers to the intervention, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you're kind of like doing your thing and doing your work in that hour. And then they're sent home with a task to complete, and you follow up. And then also we take it a step further by incorporating some ACT into the mix, because we know things happen, barriers will come up. And because there has been that trauma component, maybe it's not just intimate partner violence that has happened with the previous partner, but maybe there some neglect from childhood or some other trauma that's unaddressed that maybe even ties into the IPV incidents and whatnot. So there could be some private events that could be preventing them from moving forward and progressing the way that they should be progressing. And I don't know what you subscribe to, but I subscribe to like, hey, yes, there's overt behavior, but there's also covert behavior as well. And that covert behavior can interfere with that overt behavior. So
Sure.
identifying and acknowledging that covert behavior is sometimes pretty crucial to ensuring that that overt behavior is moved along, right?
Mm,
So when we do have those cases where, hey, these interventions, they're not progressing the way that they should, you're not really making the progress that you should right now. What is going on? Where are you feeling stuck at? What is the barrier? What's the current barrier right now? And it's not an environmental barrier, but a mental barrier or emotional
mm,
barrier. Then that's where the act piece can come in to help like physicalize that emotion so that we can help work through that emotion, find different solutions to that emotion, to feeling that emotion. Whereas before, they could have been like maybe like pushing that emotion away or those
mm,
feelings or
mm,
memories
mm,
away, or like maybe it's like a constant thing in their head. Like I keep on thinking about the time where he choked me out and I was so scared, or I keep on thinking about the time when he almost hurt the kids and I just can't even get out of bed. If you're having thoughts like that, then the act piece can help to move past that and
mm, mm, mm.
shift the relationship that you have with those memories and with those thoughts so that it's not something that prevents you from moving forward, but it's something that you can carry on your back like a backpack, but and still move forward as well. Like you still want to accept that those things happen. You still want to accept that you feel those emotions and those feelings and you have those thoughts, but you don't want it to weigh you down to the point where you're just not able to move forward. So that's where we kind of like incorporate both like the ABA and the act so we can help our clients.
Yeah, and I mean that seems to be, I know I'm really simplifying things here for the ACT practitioners out there, but that seems to be kind of one of the central sort of, you know, points of ACT is that folks have thoughts that keep coming. They try to make them go away or forget about them. That doesn't work. That makes them more intense and more problematic, or that turns them into other behaviors or whatever.
Mhm.
And with ACT, the goal is to kind of, essentially, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. So acceptance commitment training is to accept that they're there and gives you sort of ways to sort of, there they are. Nothing I can do about it. They're gonna be there. How do I deal with them when they come on?
Yeah, now let's commit to engaging in these replacement behaviors that's going to move us toward those desired goals and outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Cool. What? Why the? I haven't really heard of anyone else doing this, like as a BCBA kind of working in this area. I mean, I think there probably are because there are a lot of. I'm discovering more and more that there's a lot of folks out there that are, for example, like I think the classification in the U.S. is the uh, marriage and family therapist. There's a lot of licensed marriage and family therapists out there that are also BCBAs or also use an app.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of these folks, are have clients that are, victims of domestic violence and kind of doing that work. But I haven't heard about sort of anyone, kind of, overtly, advertising that that's what they're doing, as a behavior analyst. I'm curious, sort of, and then you also mentioned that the sort of there's the mental health therapy side. So, kind of the question is a sort of like what kind of training and sort of do you have that allows you to do this? Obviously, you have the life experience, and that's huge. And I think we see this. I think the one of the most well-known examples I think we see of sort of folks with the life experience applying it seems to be in addictions. There's a lot of addictions counselors out there that were former addicts themselves, and obviously that just provides a way to connect with folks that others
Right.
just don't have but you don't just get off drugs and become an addictions counselor. There's training and things you're going to have to go through. Similarly, I know as being a BCBA myself, I certainly didn't go through any training that would then allow me to work with victims of domestic violence, let alone any sort of severe trauma and the like. I'm curious kind of what that's looked like for you. What kind of training have you taken and mentorship and so on and so forth to kind of, be able to do this kind of work?
So I've taken a couple of certifications for the state of Florida. oh gosh, I forgot what the name of it was. I took it like a long time ago, like
Yeah,
many
yeah.
years back. Um, the same training that batter intervention providers need to train
Yep.
take. Yes, that one. I took that one. Recently there was a training by the NASW for Broward County. That's a social work organization for Broward County, and they had training on providing resources for the perpetrators of domestic violence as well. So I try to take as many trainings around domestic violence as I
Mm.
can, read articles. I've read a couple of peer-reviewed articles as well around ABA and domestic violence or intimate partner violence. A lot of them very dated, still articles nonetheless. More recently, I connected with Dr. Amy Zarling. She's doing a lot of work with ABA and perpetrators of domestic violence as well. That's like her thing. Like that's she's like just focusing on that. So I haven't dived into her work the way that I really want to just yet. And I told her like, okay, I'm just you're gonna have an email come from me very soon
Mm.
to pick your brain about the work that you do, because that's like the heart of what it is that I want to do. And I think it's just amazing that she's just kind of dedicating her life's work to making those moves as well on her end. If I'm not mistaken, she created a program that's ABA based, that's behaviorally based, to provide services for perpetrators of domestic violence that kind of like shut down the whole Duluth model that is very popular for some reason. So now they're using that program in place of the Duluth model. So, kudos to her, because I think that's a really big move. Yeah, for obvious reasons. And then also Dr. Tom Zabo,
Yes.
I pronounce his last name right. Yeah. Dr. Tom Zabo. I've been in communication with him since the end of my VCS at FIT, and he's been such a great mentor. He's doing the ACT work. He's done couples work in Sierra Leone as well for years now. He's been doing a lot of research. He's part of the ActFA lab, the Not Yeti ActFA lab, and I'm also part of. He invited me to be part of that, so I'm actually trying to put together this ABA and DV study with him supervising it and just kind of like giving us advice and whatnot along the way. So that's been like, oh my gosh, like 4-ish, 5 years now that we've been in communication. I've taken
Awesome.
ACT practicum as well. I've also provided some mentorship and coaching for a couple of his ACT courses. So I guess that's a lot.
You brought up a few sort of, I think, jargony things related to domestic violence that maybe we could just touch on briefly.
Okay.
You talked about IPV. What's that?
That stands for intimate partner violence. And the reason why there's that separation is because domestic violence doesn't necessarily have to be with a romantic partner. It could be familial. It could be even through the church. You could it just
really
intimate group. Yes. Yes.
So it's not safe to assume that domestic violence is always, a romantic partner. Like, is that so? Family violence even, is that part of that too? It really, so IPV is very specific to
your romantic partner. Yes.
And then you mentioned this Duluth model. We talked about this in our pre-chat as well, that there's this Duluth model that doesn't work all that well. And so, well, first off, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that is. But then I wouldn't mind also just knowing what's sort of the traditional path right now for, a domestic or an intimate partner violence victim. Obviously it's not ABA and ACT. I mean, hopefully it'd be great if it became that someday. But what's sort of the standard recommendation for, probably the same one that you maybe would have gotten when you were starting to look for help. Yeah. So kind of what's sort of the traditional supports, and how does this Duluth model kind of fit in there?
Oh boy, the traditional support. Can I,
if any, maybe there aren't any.
Existing?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, for sure. I have no idea.
That's another part of what makes the whole experience very punishing, because there are different resources out there. I will say that there's a lot of different resources out there for survivors, victims, children that are from abusive homes where there is intimate partner violence or domestic violence. there's a lot of support groups and whatnot. There's a lot of advocacy around it as well. The issue is that everything is like standalone. Nothing is connected. So you might talk to your doctor about the fact that, hey, I want to get checked just to make sure everything is okay with me physically, because my husband just beat me, or because my girlfriend just just slapped me around a few times, and I feel hurt, but I don't know. Maybe it's just in my head, whatever. Maybe I'm okay and whatever. So that doctor might be able to like give you some pamphlets if they even have any resources like that available for you, or if they have a staff psychologist that they could refer you to, that can give you very temporary treatment right then and there. But after that, after you leave the hospital, you're kind of like on your own, pretty much. Or if you call the police department and say, hey, my partner just did X, Y, and Z, and I'm in fear of my life. In a lot of those situations, they can't technically do anything except suggest to that partner, hey, you might want to go to a friend's house and sleep over for the night. And that's pretty much all that they can do, unless maybe they're not even supposed to be there. Their name is not on the lease or whatever. And then they can say like, look, you have to leave. But outside of that, they have no power to do anything else except suggest that you just leave for the night, unless someone is like physically hurt and it's clear that somebody was like scratched or cut or whatever. Then they can arrest someone. That's not fixing the problem,
No.
So there are just a lot of different things that are in place, but nothing that actually consistently throughout the whole lifespan of a survivor receiving services, from the time that they decide to leave to the time that they are like safe, like 100% completely safe. There's nothing that streamlines that process, or someone or an agency that says, okay, this is what you need to do step by step. There's nothing like that out there. At least down here in South Florida, there's nothing like that out there. So when it comes to resources, I mean, they're there, but they're not effective if the people that are seeking those resources don't know anything about them, that they exist, or how to actually get access to those resources. And that's a big issue, a really big issue. And then with this Duluth model, I guess to sum it up, I guess it's a very archaic way of looking at abuse within that intimate partner dynamic. And the batterers intervention programs down here in South Florida follow that model, and they create their treatment around that model. So if you're basing your treatment on something that's very archaic, then the treatment that is being provided is archaic as well. So what does that say to the effectiveness of those treatments that you're providing? Not that effective. And that's why the recidivism rate is really high when perpetrators do go through the batterers intervention program. It's because it's not very effective. It needs to be individualized. I think like ABA is, like a lot of medical treatments has to be individualized to the person, to the situation, because you have your spectrums, right? You have your extremes. You might have a perpetrator, a spectrum, but maybe this perpetrator might be on the lower end of the spectrum, where they're maybe verbally abusive only a couple of times out of the year, where on the extreme side of the spectrum, you have someone that's like physically just going in on their partner and just, abusing the kids, threatening pets and family, and threatening the immigration status on a constant basis, almost like an everyday basis. So, things are on a spectrum. So the treatment should align with where that person is on that spectrum. That's just my take on it.
A couple things that drew me. So, I mean, like, what was your experience as far as you got out and kind of got into a system? Did you kind of see one of these battered intervention people and go through that whole process? You must have. Well, first off, I think your big point here is there's really no system of support for IPV and domestic violence. victims or perpetrators or children or whatnot. There are resources available, but you know, and this seems to be the case with let's take a lot of mental health kinds of interventions, is that the individual that needs them the most is usually the least capable of navigating those systems, or navigating the resources and trying to figure out where to start and where to go and what to do. I mean, they're already quite, fragile and traumatized and, and all those sorts of things. And so, it makes sense that someone, who's, doesn't have a lot of trauma and has a lot of training and has a good head in their shoulders could navigate those things. But why would they? Because they don't need any of that stuff. I don't need mental health support, so why would I go look for them? And so, it sounds like it's just sort of, come see our wall of pamphlets and maybe you'll pick the right one, but good chance you won't, because there's 800 pamphlets up here, and you may need this one first, or this one first, or this one first, or this one first, and kind of how to do that. So that seems to be the big issue here, and that seems to be perfect for ABA, because ABA is all about systems and setting up, sustainable interventions that last a long time.
Right.
Yeah. I also imagine that, again, like autism, early intervention is probably really valuable. And I would guess that, because these are cyclical kinds of, dynamics of, you talked about already about sort of, even getting out of the relationship is a tough cycle to break. What would sort of be the ideal? And I think, having your own lived experience can really feed to this sort of, first few things, or first 10 things. You don't have to list 10 things, but first few things that would ideally could happen for these folks, the moment they're, they've acknowledged they're in the situation and they're ready to tell somebody.
Boy.
I mean, you may not know the answer. I mean, this may be something you have to do research on and figure out down the road, but I feel like there's probably some things that would ideally happen right away. And I'm thinking, if there's anybody out there listening right now that maybe you are a doctor, or maybe your husband, your partner's a doctor and a family doctor and gets patients like this, what suggestions could you make to them about sort of, someone's come in and said, listen, I'm a victim of IPV. What do I do? How can you help me? The second secret word is hope.
Yeah, I would just assume that part of, I don't know where it would fall. I'm assuming it would fall pretty high, but one of those suggestions that might be universally agreed upon would be to create a safety plan first and foremost, because
yes,
don't have that safety plan in place.
Yes.
The risk of making one wrong move and like notifying the person that you are trying to get away from. And that's where things can go awry, is when they find out, like, so you're trying to leave. That's not going to fly in my book. And then you try to leave like on the low, so that I didn't know. So you're trying to play me for stupid. So it just, you can already see like how it can start escalating if your partner is triggered, is notified that, hey, yeah, I'm trying to find a way to leave without you knowing. So I'm assuming that would be something that would be pretty high up there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That kind of crisis sort of intervention. And that again, that, if we're paralleling to, a lot of the work we do when we're working with, folks with autistic folks and other folks with like intellectual disabilities and severe kind of challenging behavior like aggression and whatnot, where we're looking to, keep the family safe, keep the staff safe, keep whoever safe first, because, there's no, ABA doesn't do much when someone is in high, no rational thinking, high intensity aggression. You can't just sort of put a plan in place. You got to keep folks safe. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I guess that doesn't happen right now. So, that's not sort of the go-to, is to, because I also think about sort of, like Maslow and those sorts of things, and the hierarchy of needs and how safety and security is at that base. I have talked on other episodes, if folks are hearing Maslow right now and hearing about how he kind of appropriated that triangle from, I think it was either the Mohawks or the Ojibways. I can't remember. But anyway, that's a side story you can Google. But Maslow's triangle wasn't his. In fact, I'm digressing here, but there was an indigenous tribe, I think, I almost feel like they were in Canada, but I'm not sure, that actually had developed the triangle first. And Maslow kind of appropriated it for his own sort of things. And I know some folks may write me letters because I might be butchering that. But anyway, point being, safety and security is still, regardless of who said it, the first thing you kind of got to deal with before you can kind of start working on, long-term problems. It's hard to sort of, deal with trauma if the trauma is still happening, and if there's still potential for trauma.
And I will say that in my journey in seeking out help from professionals, going to the hospital, talking to my doctor about it, going to calling the police and all the different professionals that are supposed to be in place to help, not one of them offered to create a safety plan.
Wow.
Yes. One. I even spoke to a victim advocate from the police department, I want to say maybe on 2 different occasions. And that suggestion was never brought up. So
it seems like
it speaks volumes.
Absolutely it does. It seems like, this is the kind of thing where one would need a lot of different services potentially, because you listed off a few things, but I mean, these are all the things that folks just don't consider. Folks are just like, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just go move away? Why don't they change their name or whatever? Sort of, they watch a little too much Law and Order and think that it's just you can just
Law and Order
jump into a witness protection plan and kind of do all that, within the span of an hour episode and move on. But they don't realize that there are so many other pieces that, make, leaving so hard. It's not just, I mean, I know you brought up initially the part of, wanting to help and, wanting to see the potential, but that's not usually the main reason that I don't think that keeps, a victim sort of in those relationships. It's all these other things, like you said, like money, like a home, it's, you mentioned immigration there. And I think, can you just touch on what you meant by immigration there? I think that's something that's, that certainly in Florida is probably, a big thing. Whereas maybe in my neck of the woods, we might not even think about immigration. What's immigration got to do with any of this?
So you'll have a lot of people that are coming from different countries, to seek asylum. You just say, because there's a lot of, there's a lot going on in the world today. But obviously, in order to live in this country, you need to have some sort of citizenship or a green card or something. And then in order to get access to benefits and be employed legally, you have to have a U.S. citizenship. So, and that for a lot of people is the starting point of a new life, a better life, not for themselves a lot of the time, but for their kids that they're trying to take out of those countries as well. So when you have a person that has all of that on their shoulders, they're going to be willing to take a lot in order to reach their goal. So if they are in a situation or in a relationship with someone who understands what that is for them or what that means for them, they can easily take advantage of that. So if they're with someone that has a status, that has a citizenship, they can vouch for that person so that that person can get their citizenship as well. I think that they have to wait like 2 years or something. Well, they have to be married for 2 years in order to kind of pass the test, I guess. And then that person will be able to obtain citizenship through the other person who already has citizenship. So in those 2 years, a lot of things can happen. And that person knows that they have a lot of power within that relationship, because any wrong move from the person that needs that citizenship status, the other person could say, you know what, we're done. No, I'm not going to agree to this. I'm not going to sign off for your citizenship so that you can become a citizen. No, you need to do X, Y, and Z in order for me to stay with you so that you can become a citizen, because that's what you want, right? Yeah. So you need to make sure that you fall in line and, basically like play your part. So that can become very, very abusive, because there's a lot of power control that is like at the forefront of that relationship or that situation. When I say immigration status, that's what I'm referring to. And, someone's being physically or emotionally abused or financially abused by someone who has that kind of power over them, there's nothing really that they can do until they just wait everything out and hope that things don't escalate to the point where themselves or their kids, if they have kids, get hurt.
Yeah, because, it's quite possible that being deported and back to sort of the home country, that context is actually potentially even more dangerous than this awful experience that they're currently in. Like, what a crazy, I can't imagine that having those two choices. And
it's like the definition of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. So like, which one do you choose? Which one is the lesser evil? Which one is least aversive option?
And this probably, feeds into some of these stories that we hear about in the news where we never get the details, but about sort of, families that end up literally killing each other, including the kids. And you're like, what could possibly be going on that would lead, say a mother to do that? Well, they're in their head, their child is going to be tortured to death. They're going to be tortured to death. And this might be the only out. This might be the, and
there's so many, it's like an onion, man. There's so many different layers to just abuse and violence.
So and that actually leads to my kind of the bigger question I wanted to ask, or more, a question, but more of a, an approach is, it seems like, domestic violence and IPV are things that really need kind of a wraparound approach. Like there's a lot of services that kind of have to, like for a case where you might have a mom who's an immigrant without any papers or without, sorry, I don't know the terms for immigration, but basically hasn't reached the point where they can become a citizen. And then they have a child, and then they have they don't have a job because the perpetrator was the breadwinner or whatever. Like, a lot of the stuff you talked about earlier about using ACT and whatnot, that's dealing with sort of, the victim and sort of their thought process and whatnot. But in order for them to kind of even get to a place where they can have the time to come be with you for an hour to have that conversation, I guess this goes kind of back to your safety plan point. There needs to be, conversations like, don't worry, we will talk to people. There's people we could talk to about immigration. I mean, I'm sure there's immigration lawyers and immigration counselors and folks out there that you can talk to. There are people we can talk to about, financial support. There are people. Do you find yourself doing that kind of work as well? Kind of that wraparound social worky kind of stuff?
Yes. It's funny that you mentioned that. Actually, I have a current client who's going through a situation where she's trying to separate herself from her abuser, and she has kids as well. And she is actually displaced from her home that's in her name. And it's been such a struggle for her to, one, go back home and, keep up all of the things that usually go on, like bringing the kids to school, going to work, like she has to travel like an hour each way just to bring the kids to school and then, go to work. And, it's really hard for me as a clinician to, listen to all the things that she's struggling with and not try to do what I can to help her where everyone else is dropping the ball. Because another thing that you'll see is, yeah, people will take on your cases or people will say that they will help you, but only to a certain extent, either because they just don't want to, either it's a performance deficit or a skill deficit. They don't want to, or they just don't know how to the extent that you need. So there have been too many times already where like maybe a lawyer might say, hey, look, you're doing too much, or hey, your abuser that is really good with words and is really charming. And we know, well, we're supposed to know this. He doesn't seem like such a bad guy. I don't know. Maybe you should calm down, or maybe you should do X, Y, and Z, or you're going to make the case worse. And now I see where he's coming from. So it's so, like I mentioned before, it's just very punishing in different ways. But yeah, I find myself trying to reach out to lawyer friends that I have and so that they can give me suggestions, reach out to law enforcement relationships that I have so that they can get in contact with some people that they know that can provide some sort of resource or assistance, do my own digging to try to give them some reliable resources that they can depend on so they can tap into that. And I know that's outside of my role, but I mean, gosh, like it's hard not to,
If it's not in your role, then whose role is it?
That's a great question. Really good.
I think that's where the work you're doing is just so important, is to sort of start showing what, a system could look like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talked a lot about kind of, the ACT piece, and I think for a lot of folks that'll resonate and make sense. Trauma and ACT do definitely go hand in hand and do definitely work well with each other. And I think it's a common thing. What other sorts of sort of ABA kind of principles and strategies, and what other things are in the ABA toolbox that could be helpful, when working with this population and these kinds of things? Or is it mostly ACT? Like when you talked about sending folks home with homework and collecting data and having goals and those sorts of things, what does some of that look like? Just
like some of the homework assignments?
Yeah, and yeah, exactly.
Gosh. It really just depends on the person. So like our treatment, like the homework assignments that I provide, they're very like tailored to the client. So I don't have like, okay, this is the homework that you're going to do on the first session. This is the homework for the second. This is the homework for the third, etc. It's okay. What is it that we're discussing in our sessions? What is it that you're telling me you have this desire to improve on, or where this block is? Okay, now let's talk about different ways that we can work on that. Okay, now we've done all the training. We've done some role playing, like I sometimes video modeling. I use video modeling. Sometimes we do role playing so that we can, or BST, I should say, so that I can provide them some feedback in real time of like how their implementation is and what they can improve on, so that they're like set up for success when they do go home for the week and do the homework assignment. And then I give them the homework assignment, like, okay, now you got in the training. Now I want you to go ahead and do this thing, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
So, gosh.
Well, just like an example of a skill you might be working on with someone. I mean, obviously there's lots and lots of them, and I know they're individualized and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But just to sort of, put some context into folks on how they might on things they might find themselves doing and with
Okay. For one person I'm working with currently, functional communication is a big piece.
Nice.
So we're pretty much doing like functional communication training. So one of the homework assignments that I provided was, I want you to go home and explain to your wife, kind of almost like an antecedent intervention as well, because he's working on his reducing his outbursts.
So sorry, this is for a perpetrator. I think that's
Yes.
important to point out. Okay, keep going. Yeah.
So he's working on reducing his outbursts when it comes to like I guess different things that kind of like frustrate him.
Mm,
Very. So his homework assignment that I gave him was to go home and sit down with his wife and let her know, hey, when I say give me a break or give me a second and I walk away, please just, stay there and just give me that second. And
mm,
because this is something that is new for me and that I'm working on, please help reinforce me that
yes.
respecting that and not,
Okay.
bringing it up or making it a big deal or anything. So that's one example of
Oh,
homework.
that's a cool example, and that's probably the perfect. I don't need a lot of them. I didn't even think about sort of. Okay, let's talk about perpetrators for a bit. I didn't even think about that. And and I think with the perpetrator, it makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a lot of parallels between our work and sort of our work in sort of the developmental disabilities sort of sector, because again, we're dealing with folks that are engaged in challenging behavior, and often you know I mean, you could probably describe the challenging behavior of a perpetrator and not mention perpetrator, and someone might
Yeah.
think you're talking about a client with developmental disabilities. It's so. What are you using? Basically, the same kind of assessments with perpetrators that you might use in sort of other areas. Like, what does assessment look like with a perpetrator?
Basically pretty much the same.
Mm, of
So, I'm not using like a VD map or anything like
course,
this.
yeah,
It's more of like an FBA.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
right. Just really using an FBA with like the older adults that
Yeah.
have families and they're, I guess what you would consider typically developing adults. I would use an FBA.
So, and again, obviously not singling anyone out, but if you're looking for sort of the function of, well, I'm curious sort of what kinds of functions you found as far as why perpetrators are engaging in those behaviors.
Gosh, so far,
Yeah.
escape is probably the top.
And what are they escaping? Just having to deal with the situation in the moment, or?
Having to deal with the situation in the moment, just kind of removing whatever that aversive is from their partner. Like maybe their partner is talking too much or nagging or complaining and they don't like it. So they engage in like, different maladaptive behaviors to remove whatever that annoyance is.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, really interesting. And do you do any work with both the perpetrator and the victim together? Like, do you do any kind of couple stuff like that? And does that even happen?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not there was
yeah,
there's one request, but they never followed through. But
yeah,
so far, no,
yeah.
not yet.
I mean, that seems like something that maybe, you know, way down the road if things are going really well,
Yes.
and it would almost be you'd almost be teaching the perpetrator to sort of, functionally communicate to the partner, do you want to come to this session with me and work on some of this stuff together?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And
Um,
later on down the line, like you mentioned, that could be an option. But I firmly believe, like, okay, let's start with you first. Let's find whatever is like triggering these behaviors, identify whatever those triggers are, because
yeah,
first you need to know what's causing you
yeah,
to
yeah,
engage in these behaviors that you're trying to change.
totally.
Recognize what they are, know when they're coming on so that you can implement some antecedent interventions so that you can like kind of like douse the fire with some water and just kind of like cool it before you really get to that point where you just explode. And I'm just using those any
No, of course, yeah, yeah,
common word that is used.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So we do a lot of like ABC work in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And are the perpetrators you're working with, are they typically still in that relationship, or are they now, or has the partner now left and now they're the third secret word is safety.
No, actually, so far the ones I've worked with, they were still in the relationship. It's funny because all of them that I've worked with so far, they had like some sort of familial structure already established, whether they're married or just girlfriend and boyfriend
Yeah.
with a child. They're under one roof and they are like a family unit already, but things are, I guess, kind of just bubbling under and sometimes the lid kind of just overflows, and that presents an issue, obviously. And that's something that they recognize that they need to work on. And they reach out so that they can work on understanding those behaviors, like why they're happening and what they can do to reduce those behaviors from happening and continuing to happen.
I mean, that's pretty, I don't know their word for this is, I mean, it's a positive that the perpetrator wants help, is what I'm trying to label there, and I think some folks might sort of presume that, the perpetrators always are, are always thinking they're doing the right thing, and and they'll never be able to be changed, and they're just bad people or whatever. How do, like, I could see totally how a victim would get to you, through a referral or through whatever, or through finding. But how do you get? How does a perpetrator even? How do you even get to the point of working with perpetrators? Where do you find perpetrators, or how do they find? How are they even finding you?
So I have a Psychology Today profile, and I think that's where a lot of the people that do reach out, the referrals come from, is through
Gotcha.
Psychology Today. And so far, all of the perpetrators that I have worked with have found me through Psychology Today.
Interesting. And how many have you worked with? Have there been a lot, like not only the exact number, but has it been that many?
Oh, not a lot.
Yeah.
Probably more children and victims and survivors than perpetrators.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe a better question would be, how many have actually reached out, do you think, in the time you've been up there? Like, how long you've been on Psychology Today? Like a few years, or?
Yeah, I would say for about maybe 4 or 5 years.
And how many do you think maybe have reached out?
I had to put a number on it.
Yeah, just a guess.
Maybe 4 to 6.
Oh, wow. So not very many. Yeah. And it'd be interesting to know, and I don't know if you've looked into any of this at all, and I'm sure you will if you once you start doing more research, how often perpetrators are even seeking support or even know that there could be support.
So I think that in itself could be a reason why that there's not a lot of change in those behaviors when it comes to perpetrators of domestic violence, because there aren't very many resources available for perpetrators of domestic violence. You have a lot of resources available for the children, for the victims and survivors. When it comes to like housing, money, when it comes to Medicaid, they provide, medical services, they provide free food every month. They provide, just a number of different things for individuals that are trying to leave that situation. Whereas when it comes to the perpetrators, there's not much available. Like they don't have someone saying like, okay, hey, you have this thing going on. You have these behaviors that are interfering with the quality of your life. Now let's try to help you. Let's give you some psychological services. Let's give you some behavioral services or some sort of counseling or consulting or whatever. Let's provide you or connect with you with, lawyers or people in the legal community that can maybe help you to reframe the consequences of your actions if these things continue, provide you with some sort of education. I have not seen any of that. I know that there are a couple of agencies in South Florida that are working on making that into a thing, but of course funding is always a big issue. So there's always that. But having something like that in existence, not that I know of. I don't know of anything like that.
No, I mean, it just speaks to sort of our general approach to everything. We don't, I think there's probably some research in sort of the criminal justice kind of criminology kind of realm on a lot of this as well. And then that we don't focus, I mean, we don't do a great job with victims in general anyway, but I mean, we still have a lot of problems there. And that's speaking to sort of the systems we talked about before, but we don't we really are. We really don't. We rarely make it seem like we don't care about the perpetrators of any kind of crime. It's more about, punishment and imprisonment and whatnot. But,
Yeah.
And certainly I think if, all intimate partner, you know, abusers actually went to jail, I don't think that happens very often either, we probably wouldn't care as much about what to do for them. But the fact that they don't get imprisoned and don't, aren't removed sort of from society means you still have this individual with all of these triggers built in that's just going to hurt somebody else, right? Whether if they finally give up on the current partner, they're going to get in another relationship and they're going to hurt somebody else, and that's why I think the stuff you're doing, although is it is so important, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy because you have someone that clearly has an impoverished repertoire, and that's why they're relying on those maladaptive behaviors. So you would think, okay, skill acquisition. Let's teach them how to communicate or teach them how to do this thing that they're not doing right now so that they can lean toward that in place of those maladaptive behaviors. But instead it's just like, okay, well, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So either you get in jail or you have to complete this batterers intervention course for 24 weeks, and we don't want to hear from you again.
Right. It'd be interesting, to look at doing some of the work you're doing, like actually in the prison system.
No, that's a dream of mine. My gosh, just imagine all of the perpetrators that have been sent to jail for domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And when they leave, what happens? Recidivism rate is going to be high because they don't know what to do. All they know is what they've been doing in the first place. And just incarceration, everything around incarceration is its own beast, because like when you leave, when you have that stain on you and you have that record, it's hard to, get a job or like just live life again. Yep. So you tend to fall into some not so savory patterns of life just to live. Add that onto not being able to functionally communicate when you are upset and angry. Like you're asking for disaster to happen. But that's like a dream of mine. I would love to work with in the prison system and teach them like functional communication training and see if that can help with reducing the recidivism rate with domestic violence and intimate partner violence. But that's like a long-term goal of mine.
Yeah, I think you can make it happen. I mean, there's definitely a lot of, and hopefully if there's folks listening, I know there's behavior analysts out there, some that are listening that work in the criminal justice system. There's some that are working in prisons. There's some that are working in sort of juvenile detention centers. And, I hope they're listening today and will, reach out and say, hey, I could totally use this kind of support. And I'm not going to name names because I might have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's at least a couple that I know in Florida that are working in the criminal justice system. So I will, off camera, I'll do some Googling and see if that's who they are, but I don't want to call anyone out in case I'm totally wrong and now they're going
to
get letters.
Okay. I can't wait.
So what's overall, it sounds like you're fairly early, in this journey, and just a lot of different things on the go. What sort of are some of the future plans for you in this practice? And
definitely some research. Trying to, like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to put together research around survivor empowerment with creating the task analysis for them to follow when they do decide to leave an abusive situation, and find out like, okay, well, where are you having the most issue, going to the next step so that we can, incorporate our interventions there and maybe incorporate some ACT if it's still something that's really like not just not doing it for you. Because again, we have different resources, just not connected. And that in itself is very punishing for someone who is looking to leave. Resources to help them be able to survive when they leave. Another thing that we are working on putting together is, you did mention like having like a wraparound approach. We've onboarded an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, actually,
Cool.
to help provide services. Let's see, another thing that I would love to be able to do, and that's something that has been like kind of sort of not really in the works for the last maybe 2 years, is creating a 501c3 so that we have like a sister that is just dedicated to providing maybe some resources and some free therapy to individuals that are in an abusive situation or have left an abusive situation, whether they're like the perpetrators or victims or children, so that they maybe can receive some ABA service because their child is in need, or that they themselves can receive some therapy or some behavioral services. And also maybe putting on an event for the month of October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so that we can provide, again, resources to the community for those that are in need, especially for those that are in those situations that need clothes, like for kids, they themselves, women that are trying to escape an abusive situation, maybe giving them some professional clothes so that they can interview for jobs if they've never worked before. So yeah, it's just a lot of different things that are just brewing in this head. It's just a matter of finding someone that can help me make it into a reality.
Absolutely. Well, if anyone has any interest in any of this stuff, I'm sure Anasha will be happy to hear from them, and we'll have your contact info in the show notes. This is really cool stuff, and I'm just so excited to sort of see kind of what this is going to look, what this will be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and what you'll be doing, and kind of what things will be in place, because I have no doubt it's going to be amazing stuff. So really cool work you're doing, Anasha, and really cool that you were able to come on and kind of share this with everybody, as well as sharing your own story. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, and I share in that excitement with you. So 5 years from now, I'm hoping that I can be on and give you some really, really good updates.
Awesome. Right on. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to check out episode 135, Addressing Human Trafficking with Behavior Analysis with Arturo Garcia, and episode 40, Applications of Behavior Science to Foster Care, Runaways, the Homeless, and Bullying with Dr. Kimberly Crosswood.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow us on Instagram @BehaviorSpeak.